Hey, this is Jacob with the Daniel 3 podcast. Thanks for joining us. Today I have my friend Grant with us. Grant, how are you doing?
Doing well, Jacob.
Doing well. It's good to hear. Uh, Grant is a friend of mine who helped me come up with I don't know if we invented the term. I like to think we did, but the term anarcho-Amish, which is I've contemplated changing my page to that or creating a new page called Anarcho Amish just for the fun of it. Um, but the reason for that being that we have very similar views when it comes to these topics of agorism, of homesteading. Um, so to start out, I wanted to kind of see where you are at, kind of post election, post 2020. Kind of a thermometer check. Where are you as far as uh, your feelings on the political world, and if libertarians should continue to think that we should be working in these systems to try to either create positive change to make our lives less influenced by the state, or if perhaps that's just becoming a total crapshoot. I'm leaning towards it's a total crapshoot, um, but uh, that's just my opinion. Just curious to hear what your thoughts are. I mean, both on the kind of in general the idea of political involvement from the libertarian perspective, and also just kind of where we are at as we hopefully close the chapter on 2020 soon.
Yeah, that cannot come soon enough.
Right.
Yeah, it's kind of odd to start off a podcast about agorism, where we're talking about can the is political action a good way to bring about a free society? In a way, it's a bit antithetical, but I will say that in terms of like the election, I'm glad that Americans chose divided government, because when we don't have divided government, one party in charge of the executive branch and the legislature, you tend to see higher deficits. You tend to see more indiscriminate spending. You see uh, just things rammed through, really, not through the legislative process, but by executive fiat, or just the so-called party leadership just insists on it. So I'm happy that Americans chose divided government. It looks that way. I know there's a runoff election in Georgia, but I don't think the Democrats will. I think the Republicans will win that election. Although there's some weird things I hear about, people boycotting that election because they're unhappy with the results. It's kind of weird. But yeah, I mean, it's. I gave a talk at Anarchon, about homesteading, and I mentioned agorism, but I also mentioned how political action, especially at the local level, can be very meaningful, and it should be the most impactful. I mean, the national races, they're not always the least important, but they ought to be the least important in our lives. And um, I gave the example of an ordinance in our municipality. They wanted It was an animal ordinance, and in order to keep animals, you had to have at least 5 acres or something like that. And the community came together, and it was struck down. And so that would be something that would affect me much more, um, probably even more than tax policy. And uh, that was at the local level. And so local is better, whether it's politics or food, or uh, you know growing local food or handicrafts or whatever. I made that mention of that in my talk, um, and that's how it should be. So it's worth it keeping one leg in the political arena, even for the most black flag anarchists. There's definitely reason to be involved as a strategic, as a tactical choice to advance liberty.
Sure. And the reason, sure, it is a little weird to start a video on agorism out with politics. And then the reason I do that is I'm trying to kind of set the stage because, I mean, we have basically four options, it seems to me, in front of us. One option is just to live apathetically in the world and be like, well, I have these principles, but I'm not going to do anything about them or make any meaningful support of other people, trying to do something about them. And that to me is off the table as a bad option. Then when it comes to like, well, all right, I have these principles and I want to do something about, these principles are inspiring me to action. Uh, we're then left with kind of like an equation, a calculation we have to make as to the available options in front of us. And the three available actions, I mean, or groups of actions, are political action, revolution, like, civil war, or the third option, which is what this video is going to be about, which is, agorism, which is sort of like this interesting, uh, a third road, as it were, towards resisting the state, towards advancing liberty. And it's weird because agorism is both considered a philosophy, but also just considered a strategy. It's kind of this weird commingling of both. But yeah, the reason I bring up politics just briefly at the beginning, I don't want to make this thing a whole lot about politics, but it's just to sort of contrast that to see, and it's interesting how, you're bringing up how there is some utility to politics, but it's really only at the local level. And I mean, would it be fair to say that the only utility that's there is probably, somewhat as a defensive bulwark, as it were, that you can use the local politic to sort of maybe ward off some of the more tyrannical aspects of the federal and state governments? Or what would you say is the most beneficial aspect to using the political systems, at least when it comes to the localized one? Because we would probably agree that, the only point to the federal one, I mean, it's just basically a popularity contest between the duopoly parties who don't have enough differences to make me care, and the Libertarian Party candidate is really only there to secure ballot access for the state and local candidates. So, I mean, what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I focused on the local level elections or local politics because like I said, it most directly affects me, but I also that was in the context of homesteading. So, if you choose to live in an HOA, more power to you. There's nothing, I don't want to say there's nothing unlibertarian about that. I mean, it should be allowed in a free society, and those types of arrangements will exist. But I'm kind of baffled by it because it's essentially government a la carte. It's, I want more government, and there might be practical reason for that, like I think it'll help land values, and my house is my main investment, and I want to live in this community. I want to live in a gated community, and that I want my neighbors to you talk about covenant communities or intentional communities. Nothing unlibertarian about it, but maybe the spirit of libertarianism of oh, they're going to yell at me because I have a boat in my driveway or something like that. I mean, for that is not for me. I'm not saying that shouldn't be the case for all libertarians, but probably the kind of libertarians I hang out with. So I look at local politics as the biggest thing that's going to let me, respect property rights, and let me do what I want with my property, or oh, you need a variance for this fence or this outbuilding, or you can't grow this crop here, you can't grow marijuana, you can't sell raw milk, and some of those things creep up to the state level and federal level. But the way that land is used or the way that I can utilize my land is mostly determined at the local level, and that's why I think things like the Libertarian Party should be more effective at that level. But then at the same time, um, Samuel Konkin, the agorist, really the guy that came up with the theory of agorism, he called that the partyarchy, and didn't have anything good to say about any, um, political. I guess the second option that you detailed, that a calculated, and that's a really I've never seen it presented that way, and just kind of the um, those four categories. I think we could talk about those all, and I mean you could probably dedicate a podcast to each one of those ideas. But
I could, but I'm rather I'm at the point where I'm rather unconvinced of at least three of them. I mean, if I was going to put them in a hierarchy, the bottom is apathy, because I'm just not a person that likes to sit around and do nothing.
yeah, well, I mean, but I mean,
Above that would be violent revolution, because I'm a big fan of big igloos, but at the same time, like, they're a last resort, in my opinion. And then oh Bob, what was your oh yeah, Hawaiian shirts, big igloos. It's a funny contrast.
well, I think just to my thoughts on the apathy, the writings of Max Stirner come to mind, and just kind of government is a spook. These are all social constructs, and I'm just going to live my life. It's dangerous. It's dangerous. I mean, that might work for a time, but at the same time, that's not that totally far off from agorism.
No, it's not. There is. It's easier to convince someone who's apathetic of these things to probably move into agorism than it would be to motivate them to bear arms against the state or to get involved politically. So that's a fair point. Well, we've been beating around the bush here. Let's get into the nitty gritty of it then. What is agorism? Like, if you were trying to give, I know we've talked about this before, but just for those who are just watching this video and haven't seen our other conversation, how would you define agorism to someone who's hearing that for the first time?
The simplest definition of agorism is, first of all, you kind of prefaced it. You said it's a philosophy, but it's also a methodology or praxis. The end goal is libertarianism, and the praxis, the means of getting there, one way of doing it is agorism. So essentially, agorism is the marriage of libertarian ideas on one hand and counter economics on another. That's the simplest definition of it.
Yeah, counter economics. That's a very good way to describe it. The way I've always tried to, and that's a good definition, is to talk about it's a counter economics. It's engaging in the gray and the black markets. I mean, we stay away from the red market because that either means bad things or communism or both. But the black and the gray markets are where the agorist thrives. And I've often put agorism in terms of it's using free market economics almost and trying to basically outcompete the state through markets. Basically saying, if you try to take the state head on with your guns, I mean, sure, there have been revolutions in the past that have worked, but as far as those revolutions leading to a more peaceful or free society, we have a pretty mixed bag. Probably the best example we have of a revolution leading to a more free society would be here in America, but the long-term projections of that experiment are so far, mixed. There's I guess some good and some bad there. but I'm a little pessimistic towards it. Maybe not the revolution itself, but just what came after it, because you always end up with at the end there's a winning side, and the winning side has power, and just men who wield power tend to make decisions that are more influenced towards their interests than the liberties and freedoms of everybody else. But then you look at Europe and both Western and Eastern Europe and the revolutions that took place there, they went far worse. So yeah, that to me just seems like listen, if the state hits a point of tyranny where, we have to go there, I'm not axiomatically against it. I just, that's a low preference for me. Political action, our group of people here in our local area, they're more of that mindset. It's never been my thing, although I've tried to experiment with it and to try it out. Went to a PA Libertarian state convention, asked myself, what the hell am I doing?
You're hurting cats. You're hurting cats is what you're doing. Yeah.
Yeah. But it just seems to me that I think the only utility to, there's two things with the political action, just to tie that bow in a knot for this video, is it's either you're trying to reach people with a platform, or you're trying to use some kind of local power defensively. Everything else to me, if you are trying to engage in politics thinking that you're going to bring about the end of the state, or you're going to actually incrementally reduce the state over time, to me that just seems naive. It seems logically naive, and it's not supported by evidence. So that's where I end there. But agorism is a very appealing option the more and more I look into it, and that's why I wanted to make this video, because to me, I really think that the liberty movement has to start thinking about what is the most effective use of our time. I did a video a month ago on praxeology and human action, and we act based upon the goals that we have. Of course, that was what Mises was talking about in his theory of human action, and we want to get to a better place. We want to move in a good direction, but we have scarce resources. We have scarce, and that's not just material, that's time and energy. So I'm motivated to want to do what is going to produce the best results, and also what is the best use of our time. And to me, politics just doesn't seem to be that, but warmongering doesn't seem to be that. Not warmongering might not be the right word, but that's typically used to describe statists and stuff who are trying to go around and turn deserts into glass. But anyway, little tangent. But yeah, agorism to me it's like a more libertarian way to be libertarian. It's like rejecting violence and coercion as the means by which we try to bring liberty. And it's not that I think, now some anarchists go to this place where they view anyone who uses defensive force in political action as immoral, or not, or like they're not a real anarchist. The SpongeBob meme where he's like the lowercase and then uppercase letters. And I don't go there. It's like, if your goal is to try to bring it to an end of the state, then I wish you well in what you're doing. But I just don't think that those methods are going to work, and I think they're not as consistent with libertarian ideology as agorism is, because if you're trying to use state mechanisms against the state, I'm not saying that can't be done in limited utility, but that can't be all we're doing. And if you want to say there's a division of labor, some libertarians will do that, and some libertarians will engage in other means. Well, that's fine. I mean, everyone has different gifts and stuff, but um, to me, agorism is something that everybody can do regardless of what else they do. Like, it's not like it doesn't have to be a pick and choose thing. So I don't want this video to be like, it's agorism or bust. And it's like, listen, if you still feel like you want to go out there and support your local LP or do whatever, I'm not trying to condemn you or trying to criticize you, but
Oh, and I still do.
yeah,
I
and
really still
yeah,
do.
I don't want to make this a ultimatum kind of video. I'm just trying to say let's let's try to go a little bit further than just every 2 years going to the booths and the voting booths and you know checking off the right boxes to try to bring our principles into reality. I think agorism is a philosophy and a lifestyle that if more people started to adopt and live by, we could start to see more radical change uh, towards a more libertarian society. Um,
Absolutely.
so, in that light, I mean, you brought it up a little bit, but the what's his name again? Konkin, the guy who founded Agorism.
Yeah.
Um, what would you say um, motivated him as far as his libertarian persuasions, as far as you know? I mean, people identify him as like a left anarchist, but he talks about using markets and stuff. I mean, is agorism something where it's he when he talks about it, is it uh, is it mutualist? Is it specifically left anarchist, or is it just kind of a generic anarchist or libertarian philosophy that he pushes?
Well, I mean that's a whole. The last time we talked, you brought up like what is left libertarianism versus right libertarianism. Are those the right ways to think about things? And the more and more that I do research, like Murray Rothbard, who most like it's interesting. Like when you say internationally, if you say you're libertarian, most people think that you're referring to left libertarianism. Right libertarianism, again, I'm using these clunky, inadequate words. It's almost unique to the United States, the LP, um, that sort of school of thought. But Rothbard said that libertarianism, in of itself, it's a left philosophy. If you look at the origins of the word left and right, it refers to where people sat in the French legislature in the 19th
Right.
century. And two very prominent libertarian thinkers, they are Pierre Proudhon, which most right libertarians, most U.S. libertarians would find a lot of fault with, really the father of mutualism, and Frederic Bastiat, who is quintessential in classical liberalism and right libertarian centers. They both sat on the left. And some other things that I've heard about the subject is that, the right refers to the monarchists, the ancien regime. They refer to that preserving tradition, and not necessarily autocracy, but I don't want to say democracy or like anti-democratic, because that's really immaterial to this discussion. But you look at Kaiser Wilhelm, or you look at Otto von Bismarck. Okay, total socialist. The state will take care of you. The state will educate you. All of these populist, free stuff, totally socialist. But no one would say he was left. No one. So the origins of socialism again, it's not useful to converse with your friends in this regard, but there's a good evidence to suggest that libertarianism is a left-wing ideology, and I know a
I
lot of
agree.
people would not identify with it. They would not identify with that.
But
Uh,
I've had some more conversations since we talked, and I've begun to think in that same way. Like I had a conversation with a guy named Joe uh, Hartman, I believe was his name. He was uh, running in the state of God, what state was it? Idaho, I think, or yeah, I think it was Idaho. He was running at the local level with the Mises Caucus support, but yeah, we were having a conversation. And yeah, he brought up the same thing that libertarianism is kind of fundamentally more of a left wing uh, philosophy when you look at it from like what traditionally left wing and right wing meant, bringing up just like you did where those terms came from, which was like the French uh, parliament, I guess, where like the left side was opposing the king and the right one was in favor of it. And libertarianism does, it's funny. It is more left wing in that sense. And at the same time, a lot of us can get labeled as right wing. At least a lot of the libertarians that I associate with, the coming out of the Austrian Rothbard tradition or the Ron Paul tradition, because we talk a lot about free market economics, and we are as far from the socialist side of economics as you can get. So it's funny. It's like the whole four quadrant political grid is broken as far as I'm concerned.
oh, but it's
Every time I take one of those tests, it puts me like pretty much close to the center, which is just funny because it's like I feel like I'm as anti-center as someone. They're not. I mean, I'm sure there's people more radical than me, but as far as like not being crazy, I'm as far from the center as you can be. But it's just because people view these topics in these like black and white ways, where it's just like, well, you're either left or right, capitalism, socialism, you're authoritarian or libertarian. But I think that oversimplifies matters. Um, I think agorism, even though it might be rooted in the people who founded that and first pushed it, might have came from more of like a socialist or mutualist mindset. I don't think that really matters because at the end of the day, whether they would agree with this or not, if they were here to like defend themselves or to hear what I'm saying, I feel like it is more of a capitalist, free market capitalist or economic philosophy in terms of it is based upon this idea of you know competition in the free market and voluntary transactions. And about the only thing that they might be wary of is just which we'll get into here in a bit, is just when it comes to like property, what their theory of property rights is and homesteading and uh, and then also the relationship between employers and employees and whatnot. They might be concerned about that, but ultimately, uh, even though it might be a left on, people have to stop thinking, I think, that left libertarian or left anarchist has to be tied to socialism. I don't think it needs to be. I think that socialism is just its own thing entirely, and it might be attractive to some left anarchists, but uh, to me that's neither here nor there. It's just they're completely separate entirely. What would be some so let's come up with some examples like of ways you can like what agorism looks like as far as everyday life. What are some things you can do that would fall under the umbrella of agorism? Because that can help to for because I mean we can try to define it, but I think that showing it as far as like explaining it in examples might help people to understand it better. This idea of engaging in the gray and black markets and kind of competing against the state. So like, what are some examples that you would think would be good ones to discuss?
Well, I think it's important to say what it's not. So just to say that agorism is black markets is not, um, you know, it's not. It misses some things. So like a gangster hiring a hitman to kill someone, that again, if agorism is the marriage of counter economics, i.e., black markets, with then that's just an example. With libertarian thought, well, you know, an act of aggression that's not in self-defense uh, breaks the non-aggression principle, and that's not agorism.
Sure.
Someone
Yeah.
who traffics, engages in sex trafficking or sex with minors, that is not agorism. Is it a black market? Well, sure, there's black markets for those things, but that's not within the school of thought. That's antithetical to it. But like the simplest thing is just, it's amazing how. I'll start with the simplest thing. You buy something off of Facebook Marketplace or Craigslist, and you don't pay sales tax. Okay, technically, yeah, that's a form of counter economics in some way. That the state doesn't get their cut, and you found a way around the state there. With like a homesteading, harvesting your own uh, resources and circumventing, gas tax or something like that. That's a weak form of it. Um, some stronger examples have certainly been born out of the COVID crisis and the lockdowns. People that do business despite government edicts. I don't know. As the state gets bigger, obviously the black markets get bigger. Obviously, the counter economy grows, and you saw that in the Soviet Union. There was a whole word to describe it. It was called blot in the Soviet bloc countries. Um, in Cuba, it was called socialismo, and just the informal barter and underground markets used to um, acquire goods and services that the state didn't want the people to get their hands on. Those are all examples, and it can certainly ratchet up from there in terms of um, cryptocurrency. That's practically one of the legs of the stool of the counter economy. Um, Paying people under the table. I mean, you see that, like, hi, I'll do this job for $5. Hi, I'll hire you to do this job for $5 an hour. Okay. And then there's someone screeching in the background that, oh, how dare you, you're taking our jobs or you're oppressing this person. Yeah.
I love that. I'll work for $5 an hour. Autistic screeching leftist comes in like, no, you gotta pay him $7.50 an hour or he can't work. Like, well, I guess he can't work.
No, but that's
unskilled laborer goes, thank you. No, I don't have a job at all.
It's not just leftists. I mean,
true.
Someone comes to this country, and they can earn 100 times more than they earn in their country of origin. You wouldn't cross that border and provide for your family better, and so they're screeching that those people are going to take those jobs, even though it means lower priced goods and services for everyone.
Right, exactly. So it's right, and it's good to make that distinction. That's kind of why I was saying black and gray markets, and agorism is probably more gray market than black market, but it just depends on, I guess, how you define things. I mean, some people would say anything in the black market is immoral and illegal, and the gray market is just illegal. But I'm trying not to be too pedantic here. I guess there could be some things in the black market that might be like frowned upon in some sense, but maybe not like acts of aggression. So they'd be like black market, not quite gray market. I don't know, but yeah, it's doing things that uh, aren't hurting anybody, but you're just doing them outside of the state approved avenues that involve either submitting to state regulation or oversight, or paying the piper to the state tax collectors. Um, yeah, paying people under the table, or using various cryptocurrencies, or bartering's a more pretty common example. I mean, I know I do that a lot in my line of work. If I have to do a job for someone in business, and I know that their business is something that I would likely patronage in the future, then I'll be like, hey, I'll do the work for you, and this is approximately how much this would cost, but instead of charging you, let's come up with a trade, and that works out. Bartering's not always the most efficient means of trade, but it can be useful, and I think that although currencies were invented to make trade easier, when we have our currency monopolized by the state, and then the currency is not even backed by anything material, obviously there are problems that go along with that. Bartering is a good way to avoid having to submit to those things, and that's one of the more, like, when I first heard of agorism, that was one of the more common examples that was given. Was like, people in local communities could do work for each other, and this was probably before cryptocurrency was invented. People didn't know how they would do things without using government issued currency or using gold. And gold's not always the easiest thing to come about in trade. So people would talk about bartering. But yeah, cryptocurrency definitely adds a whole new layer to this, where people can still do things in these transactional methods that are very similar to what they would do already, but they're just using a different currency that doesn't come with all the same strings attached. If they're doing it correctly. Now
I think one of the things, like, you brought up this criticism last time that one of the downsides to the black market is, well, if you're going to barter, it's very hard to build wealth, but also it's hard to insure your investments or your infrastructure or your business if it's not operating out in the legal market. I mean, you kind of have that problem now with marijuana, in terms that it's illegal at the federal level. So you have these dispensaries and businesses that are just operating in cash. The banks don't want to touch it. Right. So that is certainly a downside to it, and that's probably one of the biggest challenges that it faces.
True, but I mean, we have to, again, like the calculation, maybe in the short term, it is riskier to operate in the black and gray markets than to operate in the status-controlled, free markets, as they're called. But in the long term, if you are completely dependent upon the state-controlled markets, and the state-controlled markets collapse or morph into something that puts you out of business for other reasons, then it doesn't matter whether the banks and insurance companies would help you out. If in the long term, there's risk there. There's risk no matter what you do, and it's not wrong to want to mitigate risk. And I'm not telling anybody that to embrace libertarianism or agorism, you should go out there and throw caution to the wind. But, baby steps. Start with what is easy, and what you can do now, and just look for little ways over time, and just like a snowball, just keep building that up. The more you can engage in commerce and trade with people without having the third party be privy to it, the more it can just be the voluntary transactions between you and the other person, the better. But it doesn't even need to be a transaction between other people. I mean, agorism can just be, being more self-sufficient, and you know, uh, and this is where homesteading comes into it, because another thing that is going on in the libertarian world right now, actually, it's going on pretty much everywhere, of people of every political persuasion, just because of the year that 2020 was. But people are very much, especially in the libertarian world, they've been this way for a lot longer, in the prepping mindset, and food, ammo, and all that. But where sometimes prepping, where the prepper falls short, is like they think about, well, oh, cool, I can survive for 6 months or a year or 2 years with all the supplies I have here at my house. I'm like, okay, but like, are you planning to die after that, or do you want to keep living after your supplies run out? Like, you need to not just prepare for, like, turmoil that can happen because of uh what's going on locally or geopolitically, but also you need to be able to prepare for living your life if the state does one day collapse, or if things drastically change. I mean, I haven't researched this probably as much as I should. I mean, there's a lot of talk right now about the Great Reset, and that used to be kind of like something you could laugh at because only people like Alex Jones were talking about it. But now I actually saw the other day that, like, it's an idea that actual politicians are talking about. Maybe not in the, like, as dystopian as, like, it's been talked about by people like Alex Jones for years, but it's the idea of a great reset of some sort is becoming more mainstream post COVID. Justin Trudeau, who I'm referencing, he was in a speech just last week saying that we have an opportunity, basically, because of this, to push for a great reset, to wipe people's debts clean and to start over and to build a new system that's more equitable and and sociable for everybody. So, of course, the internet went crazy when he used the term "Great Reset." That everyone's red flags went up. But yeah, if something like that happened, whatever level of dystopian a Great Reset could look like, if you don't want to be having to live under that, you're going to have to start thinking now about how you will live outside of those systems, and whether that means staying where you're at or moving somewhere else. You have to have a game plan. So this gets into, I think, kind of part of what your speech was about at Anarchon this past year, which was called what was it? Homesteading versus prepping. That was the name of the speech. So
a libertarian primer. Yeah, that was
right.
it.
So what would you say? Well, so yeah, let's get into that. What was the main point you were trying to drive home with that speech? In kind of reference of how it relates to agorism as well.
Well, basically, I wanted to compare and contrast homesteading and prepping, and they're related, and how they're related to libertarian thought. And mostly, why I began it by saying, why do they antagonize preppers and homesteaders? And for preppers, I mean, it's like it's kind of a big FU to the state, implicit. It's saying, I don't think these central banks, I don't think FEMA, disaster relief, these stimulus handouts, this broken government, I don't think this is sustainable. and so I'm preparing for the worst. And so it's a slap in the face to the government. That's why they're. I mean, why would we ever fail you? I mean, we protect you and clothe you and house you and educate your kids. Why would you ever doubt us? So that's kind of obvious. And then homesteading, you know, a lot of it comes down to property rights, in terms of, well, I mean, you can't keep a horse at your house. You can't raise chickens. I mean, my friend Chad DeSantis, who's you know huge in the big L libertarian politics. He's in the LP. One of the first times I heard him speak, he was like, "Look for people that keep chickens, and you'll find libertarians." And here I am. I've got 12 chickens or 13. I don't know. It's called chicken math because you can never really keep track of how many you have. Um, of course, the states, mostly local governments, have issue with this. But for a long time, well, and then there's the concept of homesteading, which factors into it, and that's the homesteading principle, which is articulated by Rothbard and Ayn Rand and who else? Even Hans Hermann Hoppe, Triple H talks about it. That is mixing labor with the land, and then we're talking about unoccupied or abandoned property, and then you mix your labor with it, which we have a lot of discussions about what constitutes mixing your labor. I cleared the field, I built a house, I dug a cat hole and took a leak. I don't know what constitutes. That's open to debate. There's that form of homesteading, and the government, the U.S. government, around the time of the Civil War, which one of the few perhaps libertarian pieces of legislation that came out of that, aside from freeing the slaves, was the Homestead Act, which was like 6 pages long, and it filled up half a continent. Anyone could apply for, I think, 150 acres, and they would work the land, and after 5 years it would become theirs, and it filled up half a continent. And it was replaced by none other than the Bureau of Land Management, or BLM. So despite what you've been told, BLM is a terrorist organization. So
yeah, I remember you said that, I think, back in the chat a while back. The BLM, the terrorist group, which is funny. Yeah, so the homesteading part of this. I mean, there's two parts to homesteading, I guess. There's the actual act of, like, how do you make land yours, and
Mhm.
then B, what you do with that land once you have it to make it work for you as best as possible to provide for your needs. And yeah, there's two interesting aspects of that, and we should touch on both of them. This is where the classic debate. I've done this debate so many times, but with our Georgist friends, of what actions constitute legitimate claims to land. I mean, actually, that's not even a debate. The Georgist just says you can't own land because it's immoral, because it's an act of aggression. But if you can get them off of that for a second, then they just endlessly move the goalposts, because they try to ask, well, how can you legitimately own land? What actions can give you ownership of it that isn't, just you constructing a 10-foot fence mounted with automated turrets that shoot anybody that dare to try to climb over the border. That's basically what Georgists think owning land is. It's like they say, especially the anarchist Georgists, is they think that there's no difference between the anarchist Georgists have legitimately said to me that
that's a contradiction. What? The whole thing is land value. What?
Yeah, well, no, yeah, no. I've had anarchist Georgists tell me that LVT would exist in a anarchist society. That it's just something that people would do because it would people would work that out through the market via their insurance companies, DROs, and incorporated cities. And they're saying that private land ownership makes you a state. Is their argument that if you own land, you are acting as a state in your land. Yeah. Yeah, chew on that for a little bit. Which,
Well,
but
I'll chew
the
on it.
problem is, it's like I see where they're coming from, except that the difference is, like, if I invite you onto my land, I have the right to evict you. I don't have the right to hold you permanently hostage and steal half of the products of your labor for the rest of your life. I don't have the right to enslave you just because you came onto my land. But, like, I have the right to evict you, and I have the right to defend myself on my land if you invade it. But the state claims a right to basically take your wealth and to hold you hostage, like you can't leave. Uh, a landowner can't do that in a libertarian sense. I mean, like,
So what?
they could, but no serious libertarian would say property rights under a libertarian model, that they're justified in doing that.
So what? Why are they? Why? What makes them anarchists? I mean, are they just paying this land value tax and they're just burning the money, or like what is it?
Well, they say they're true anarchists because they oppose. Uh, to them, it's not about opposing the state. They take the no rulers thing to a very radical extreme, where basically uh, it's the dangerous side of the left anarchist kind of like mindset. Like we talked before about how like there's uh, one of the two ways you can describe the left-right divide in the libertarian world is that like there are those who care about their like economic freedoms and care about like property rights and kind of like breaking down the nuances of like the non-aggression principle and all that. And then you have kind of the left and our libertarian thought, which would be more like the oppressor versus oppressee narrative, which I do find to be more compelling. But if taken too far, or like if you have that and you have that built upon some really weird presuppositions, it can take you to some weird places. And this is an example of one of them where the some of the left anarchists and libertarians basically think that any kind of hierarchy where someone has advantages or resources or like economic freedoms that you don't have, that you are being oppressed and that you are less free, which to me is not correct.
Yeah, Rothbard does a good
Yeah,
equality as a revolt against nature. I mean,
right.
resources are not in nature; they're not distributed evenly. So it's kind of just the reality that we're in. I find it interesting that these self-proclaimed Georgist anarchists. I mean, if they're talking about no rulers, I don't know who they're paying the land value tax to. It's just
They don't know who they're paying the land value tax to.
Yeah.
Trust me, I've asked them.
Okay.
I mean, at least the Georgists who just want a state just come out and say, yeah, I'm an anarchist and I want a state that does courts and defense and land value tax. And it's like that's respectable. Then you have the Georgists that want to pretend to be anarchists, and I'm like, okay, but I mean, now listen. I mean, LVT could be, listen. If you have an incorporated city and they have it's kind of like an HOA, like whatever. Like it's similar enough, and if you want to go you want to go make a commune called, New Georgia or whatever, New George. I can't think of a good. There's Ancapistan. I can't come up with a Georgistan. You want to go? You want to go build Georgistan and have a fee for living there and call it land value tax? you're not forcing people to live there or holding them hostage, then, whatever, go do you. But, um, to me, that's really stretching the idea. But some of them say that it wouldn't just be private communities that would have it. They say that like anyone who claims land and doesn't try to pay back to society what they've taken, because when you take land and own it, you're taking from society. I'm like, yeah, well, because land's a scarce resource. I'm like, everything's a scarce resource.
Yeah.
Like everything. I mean, we can't view people taking resources without violence as, they're like, well, this is what it comes down to. The threat of aggression used to defend what's yours is not initiating aggression. And that's where sometimes left libertarians get confused, is that they view people who protect their property rights as initiating aggression. Like, no, they're not initiating aggression. They're just enforcing, the claim of what's theirs if someone tries to take it.
Yeah, and that is part of mutualist thought, which it's a different. I mean, that's Proudhon. Most of Proudhon's ramblings are just property is theft, property is theft, property is theft, and if you have, I think, like with anarcho-syndicalism, ultimately at the end of the day, you're going to have something resembling a state, and it's going to be a repressive, authoritarian state at the end of the day.
You can't eliminate all coercion. What you want to do is eliminate the monopoly of coercion and initiating aggression, which is the state. There's always going to be something that is enacting some kind of civil justice or civil governance that is like enforcing property rights and dealing with those who initiate violence against other people.
Oh yeah, there's always going to be rules. I mean, anarchists are not first of all, anarchists are not just, they want chaos. They're not the Joker. There's going to be laws. And another way of thinking of government is just conflict resolution.
Right.
So under Samuel Konkin's idea of agorism, I forget the term for it. It's just kind of like a mutual agreement that, two parties enter into an agreement, and then they have a list of third-party arbiters that they deem that are acceptable. It's not, well, we live in this jurisdiction, so, we're stuck with the U.S. court system, or we're stuck with the Canadians. Why does it need to be tethered to borders? That's so stupid and arbitrary to me.
And tethered to borders that are arbitrary. It's like, I mean, there will be borders within the market, but there are borders that the market dictates, which are based upon voluntary transactions. Whereas the problem with borders in the statist sense is that these are just arbitrary lines decided upon by politicians, not by any kind of market force. So homesteading, to get back off the tangent of, anytime you bring Georgists in, you have to have a 10-minute.
We promised not to go there, but we did.
So to homestead, to me, this doesn't seem complicated. I think every society that's ever existed has, kind of had a generic understanding that, like, what's yours is yours and what's mine is mine. And people have been, for thousands of years, going back through history, have been able to work that out. To work out what, where does the boundaries of my property end and where does yours begin? And people work that out. People generally work that stuff out peaceably because, for the most part, people prefer peaceful solutions to violent solutions. There are some people out there that are, maybe more oriented towards violence, but they generally get ostracized very quickly and generally end up having to play by the rules, even if they can come up, they might make threats and they might be hot-tempered, but generally the society through the market forces and through just like social pressure keeps people in check, because if you just go around and acting aggressively anytime there is some kind of like little dispute or something that needs to be worked out, it's just not going to go well for you. People don't like to deal with people who are like that. People tend towards peaceful solutions when they are allowed. If when the state gives you no other recourse but to use violence, that's one thing. But when the state isn't restricting options, the market bears these things out. So, to me, that's the simple answer. When people are confused about how homesteading would work in a libertarian sense, and this is where there can be some. I understand why people might want to be involved in the local political realm, because they might be trying to, at least like in areas where there might be land that could be more easily homesteaded, but the state is putting up barriers to entry. It's like you don't want to be an agorist who ends up in jail, who just decides like, well, I'm just going to go and take this land and make it my own, and then the the original BLM comes and tells you what's for. So the easier it is to acquire land, the better. You don't need the state to do that, but while the state exists, you might have to play by their rules to out of self-preservation. But once you have the land, what should libertarians be doing in keeping with this mindset of agorism, and also kind of like pushing the prepping mentality to not just be, let me hoard a bunch of crap for when shit hits the fan, but about like, let me try to build my life in a way that can sustain me through while the state exists, and I have to operate and I would prefer to operate either self-sufficiently or in these gray markets, and then also that can sustain me post-state if we ever get to that.
It's interesting because we can break it down by the left libertarian, right libertarian paradigm, but Jeffrey Tucker, who sometimes writes for Mises and the FEE, Foundation for Economic Education, he breaks the dichotomy into brutalists and humanitarians. And the brutalists are the kind of, there's a place for this, and just because you advocate property rights does not make you a brutalist, but it's just, I push liberty because, I can discriminate against people, and, I don't want people of color in my restaurant, or I don't want, immigrants here. I want to say these terrible things about this group of people. Those terrible things they say, that might be protected by free speech, and that is liberty, but that's the ugly side of it. Not all libertarians are good people. Whereas the humanitarians want to see, they see that the potentials that are unlocked when the government removes barriers to free markets. They see the synergy and the mixing of new ideas when you have diverse immigrants coming into an area, or open borders and free trade, and the freedom of association, and that's beautiful. So there are, both pertain to liberty. Both are libertarian in a sense, but libertarians should be using their property, their resources. First of all, I can't tell you. The market will dictate how you should use your property, but it should be used to build up the community, so you can provide for yourself, and be self-sustaining. Prepping gets very expensive, and I am not saying do not prep. don't get the means to defend yourself. I'm not saying that, but there's very little aesthetic to that. I mean, okay, yeah, you have enough food to survive 6 months. Now what? Do you
Right.
have a business in place? Can you sustain that? I mean, are you done? Was it just to survive 6 months after the society crumbled? There's no point to that. There needs to be an aesthetic, and whether it's making a small business or being able to provide supplement your food, or using alternative power systems or permaculture, or whatever, handicrafts. I mean, that I'm more attracted to that than just old school building a bunker prepping. Although it is cool, I'm not gonna lie.
Right. One of the things that comes to mind when I think about this is, excuse me, um, if you live in an, so some people are going to be like you to an extent where they're going to want to go get a nice parcel of land, be as self-sufficient as they can. Some people will go even further and say, I actually just want to be a full-time farmer and grow a bunch of food and crops and stuff. And like we need that. Like if that's you, go out and do that. Like that is all well and good. Not everybody can do that. Maybe from like a skill point, like it's not their skill set. They're not physically able to, or they don't have the desire to. They don't live in an area that's very well equipped or compatible with those options. So what I tell to people in those positions, and I'm kind of there myself to an extent. I mean, I have some land, but not enough to like reasonably grow all the food that I would eat or have a surplus even. So I try to think, what can I do, both in a homesteading sense and in a even now, in an agorist fashion to make myself useful in the market. Um, One of the things, and I know people. This is where I first heard it. I'm sure someone else has said it, but this is where I heard it. So I'm going to bring up your favorite neocon, Benny Shapshap. Um, he once described capitalism as free markets as forced altruism because you do not get what you want unless you figure out how to provide someone else what they want. When it comes to trade, I mean, if you can be self-sufficient and island to yourself, then have at it. But a lot of us can't do that. We can't produce everything that we want and need. So we have to go find people that can produce the things that we want and need, which means we have to figure out what they want, and we have to say, all right, well, I need to be able to provide something of value in the market. And this is where like people who are involved, like I think the people who are going to have it roughest if we ever have to transition to a post-state society are those involved in government work because
Yeah,
or anything related to that. It's like
yeah.
if what you're doing and the skills you are trained in don't translate without a state, uh, you know, time to start thinking about that because you need to be able to have some sort of skill set. And I mean, not to say that if your skill set is I'm you know I'm a young strong person and I'll go work in a factory or go just work on a farm and just my skill set is I'll just work very hard with my body. Like okay, like that's an option, and if that's not even a bad option, I'm saying. But you need to be thinking about that and thinking, am I physically able to do that? Because everyone's at different phases in their life. Someone in their 50s or their 40s, or someone who has, various health conditions or whatnot, might be like not, either a preference that would lead them not to want to do a lot of physical labor, or maybe they're just not able to do that much physical labor. So you need to be thinking about, how much can I provide for myself? And that's the homesteading part of it. And then the agorist part is what skills do I have to bear into the market that can be used to either barter or used to obtain some kind of, currency that's not, the dollar.
Yeah.
And we have to be thinking about that. And I'm not saying it's an easy calculation, but it's those are calculations and things we need to be thinking about now. And the more and this is where agorism and homesteading are, it's kind of like a synergistic thing. I think if libertarians, people who are liberty minded, started kind of focusing on that more and more, trying to figure out how to, shore up their home and, also figure out how to engage in the world without the state more and more. Again, it's you don't have to do it all at once. Just pick one little thing, and it's like hey, I'm going to try to find think like here's an easy one: eggs. Instead of going to the grocery store and buying eggs, find someone who locally who produces eggs.
Mm-hmm.
Try to see if you can trade crypto for eggs. Yeah. I mean, I should do that right now. I should when this is over, I should send you crypto, send you some Bitcoin for a dozen eggs, and I'll come pick them up next week.
Oh, QR code view my wallet.
Yeah, I mean, it's like that's a little thing, but the more we start doing that, to me, that is, every little thing we do that doesn't involve the state is a victory, and to me, that is the beauty of agorism is living out libertarian principles and saying we can exchange and interact in a vibrant market without the state. And if we think we have to end the state to start doing that, I think that's a flaw in our thinking and kind of like part of our conditioning that we still haven't worked through.
Yeah, and it's interesting because you're talking about like building your skill set for a stateless society. It plays right into it wasn't Konkin, but it was one of his students that they developed this whole class theory. And I know, I mean, this is kind of the language of the left or even Marxists or Leninists. Like Lenin talked about the vanguard of the most class conscious people that would, be the Communist Party. On the total flip side of that, within agorism, there's this class theory where the bad guys are the statist capitalists, or just the statists in general. They work for the government. They make money through coercive means through government. And then there's non-statist capitalists that holders of capital. They're not class conscious, but they're not necessarily working for the government. And then it's the entrepreneurs that are the top of the class theory, the innovators, the risk takers, the people that know the power of a totally freed market. That's how he breaks it down, and it nestles nicely into what you're talking about in terms of if your only the wealth that you generate is through being part of the government, without the government you're going to have a rough time.
Exactly. So yeah, agorism is like it's when if someone asks, is it a philosophy or is it a methodology? It's like yes, it is. It is literally both at the same time, and it's pushing. I think it's pushing libertarians to live as libertarians. To not just to make our principles matter and to say like even in like from the little things we do in life to the big things, from buying a carton of eggs to what your career is to where you live and how you come about the again, it's like we all have limitations as to what we can do now. I'm not trying to tell anybody to go out and make rash decisions, but just think about little ways that you can live outside the statist bubble, and you'll be amazed at how quickly that can snowball. And like that little, it's almost like a drug with a little thrill of just doing a little thing outside of the statist world, and then you're hooked, and then you're looking for more and more ways that you can do that, because freedom feels good. You know what I mean? Like doing something without like that constant like third party, it's like if you were ever in a school classroom with a very like authoritarian teacher who was just like always watching everything you did, and then like you get one day the teacher's not there and you have a substitute, and it's just like you feel like that burden lifting off of you, or like you come home from school early. If you have like really strict parents and you come home from school one day and your parents are like not home before you, and you're like, oh wow, I have like an hour of freedom, not have someone constantly watching what I'm doing. It's similar to that. It's like, normalize freedom. Like don't like make freedom something that is more and more something that you appreciate as a normal in your life, and not just like this unobtainable goal. Like one thing you said in our first conversation that I really liked was like the libertarian sometimes can be too focused on like asking to be free, and the agorist comes along and says you're already free.
Yeah.
Like in not maybe in a consequential sense, like you might not be able to avoid the consequences of all your all actions, and you might have to from a sense of self-preservation, like if a mugger in a back alley puts a gun to my temple and asks for my wallet, out of self-preservation, I might give him my wallet, but I'm not going to act like he earned my wallet and that it was the right thing to do to give him my wallet, and and I'm not going to normalize, theft, and I'm not going to normalize aggression. What I do want to normalize is living free and the principles that I espouse. And I think, this kind of relates to we're both also Christians, and it kind of relates to like the whole like idea that like to preaching the gospel and going out there and like telling people about your faith. It's not terrible, but what's more important is living that out and like letting people see Christ in your actions, and seeing the way you live as being different. And that applies to Christians in terms of, how they live their lives, their testimony and their evangelism. And that applies to libertarianism. It's like, if you talk a good game about free market economics and stateless society, but everything you do is by the books like a statist, and people are going to be like, well, he talks a good game, but he does everything the same way we do. So, it's not as compelling of an argument if someone isn't at least, if there's ways you can avoid doing the state and you can push the envelope of avoiding the state in the here and now, the more you do that, I think the more the liberty movement can pick up steam and bring more people in. I mean, I think we're in an interesting time right now where, although there's still a lot of people out there who are maybe statists in a sense, there's not a lot of people out there who are really like licking the boot, in the sense of like they don't recognize that it's a boot. Like it used to be that people would always view the state as a good, and now at least I think a majority of people have moved past the state as good to, well, the state is a necessary evil. So like they recognize it's a boot and that they're licking it, which is better than someone who's licking a boot and trying to tell you it's cake. But now we have to convince people, hey, yeah, you see it's a boot. Guess what? You don't need to bend over and kiss it. You don't need to.
It's a boot.
You're trying to make sure my video gets doesn't even get uploaded into YouTube. It's gonna get halfway through and just get eradicated from existence.
Sorry.
No, it's fine. Yes, I mean, I think we pretty much covered everything. Agorism is living in the gray market as much as you can, finding ways to be self-sufficient without the state, and to interact with people without the state, and homesteading is an interesting and synergistic uh, libertarian concept as well that goes along with agorism. And those are things that I think we need to be pushing forward, in this post-Trump, post-COVID world that we live in. That's, I mean, in a lot of ways is drastically different than what the world was 10 years ago or even 2 years ago. I mean, the world just feels drastically different. I'm not like trying to predict mountains are going to move in the next year. For all I know, the next year or two might look like more of the same. But a mindset, I think, in people has shifted. And the more consistently we can live out these principles and show them to people, the better chance we have of actually seeing these principles in our society. Do you have any closing thoughts?
No, I like you said, there's many ways to do liberty, and I can't think of any other way for myself. I mean, some people will, invest in crypto. Some people will invest in or get proficient at disruptive technologies like 3D printing, and I dabble in it. But the way my place at this time is through homesteading, and I don't fear civil war. I don't think it's coming. I don't want it to come. And the accelerationists, I mean, it's not. If it does come, it's not going to be fun. It's not going to be as fun as they think. And I just want to be a peaceful guy living out my days on my farm, and that's what I want.
Amen, man. Anarcho-Amish all the way, right?
All the way. Yep.
All right, man. Well, hey, thanks for doing this. I think this will be helpful for people. Have a good rest of your night, man. Stay safe.
Thanks, Jacob. Take care now.